everybody, and welcome to Win Championship Traits for Life, a show focused on strengthening the mental fitness of athletes, coaches, and anyone and everyone that works with a team on any level. I'm Lee Elias, that's JB Spizzo, and we are joined today by Dr. Derick Anderson. Dr. Anderson is an accredited clinical and sports psychologist with over 25 years of experience in sports and performance psychology and mental health training in unique settings. Let's cut right to the brass, though, for our audience. Dr. Anderson has worked with athletes and teams within the NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB, and has also devoted his professional efforts to consulting the U.S. Army and Army Corps of Engineers, in addition to supporting first responders and elite law enforcement domestically. To put it lightly, this man has an incredible amount of experience and knowledge when it comes to player performance and mental health, and we are fortunate to have him with us on Win today. Dr. Anderson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being so gracious in the way you introduced me. I appreciate that.
Well,
thanks for coming on, Doctor. Good to see you again, Doctor. Thanks for coming on.
This was a very easy intro to write for you, sir. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, most of our audience is the athletes at the middle school, high school, collegiate level, and some coaches. So your credentials speak for themselves. And I'll tell you right now, first question, jumping right into it. We said it, you're a well-known sports psychologist. You've worked really at every professional major sport level. How did you discover this was something you wanted to do and dedicate your life to?
So it really discovered me. I was working in juvenile justice and at the time working with disadvantaged kids who were incarcerated. And this was in the 90s. And the chaplain for the Miami Dolphins heard about some of the work that I was doing. And Coach Johnson, Jimmy Johnson at the time, had a penchant for acquiring athletes who had a troubled past or even a troubled present. And so he wanted somebody who could go there and work with the guys who had talent, but also had issues off the field. So sports actually found me. I was never an avid sportsman or really passionate about sports. I enjoyed it recreationally and casually, but it wasn't a passion of mine. And I talk about with players that there's you can get a player who has passion, you can get a player who has talent, and you can get a player who has a combination of both, and that's the holy grail of them. But if I have to choose between talent and passion, I'm going to go with passion. So it's weird that I say that I don't have a passion for sport, but I do have a passion for working with people and figuring out systems, and especially complex organizations and systems like sports or military or prison systems, anything like that. I do have a passion for looking at those kind of systems and trying to understand what works inside of it. So I started off that way in sports and continued to do work with the NFL, and eventually became disillusioned with sport a little bit because of the political nature of it inside. Once you get inside, it's like once you look behind the curtain and see what the bones of it really are. And so I wanted to go and do something more interesting and that I thought I could help people more. And that's when I started to do work with the military and later on law enforcement and prisoners, et cetera.
I love that you said that it kind of found you. And I think that especially for our listening audience, one of the things I love to talk about, and JB does too, is that, when you're in the sport, when you're an athlete, it becomes your life, it becomes your passion, but it's really only later on in life that you realize you can apply the passion you have for sport to other things. So, my journey is a little bit opposite in the sense of everything was sport to me. Everything was ice hockey to me. And then once my career started to wind down, I started to realize, man, I can apply this work ethic to writing, to business, to podcasting, to other things. And they found me in that regard. So I love that you said that, because again, when you're in the game, you tend to get tunnel vision that the game is the only thing that matters. And I understand actually from an athletic point of view why some people may feel like they need to do that, but it can expand beyond that dramatically. And I want to be the first to say also, thank you so much for your work with the military and the armed services and the first responders and everyone. I think that's incredibly noble. I don't think enough people are doing that. I host another show that's completely about military veterans, and there's a lot of help that needs to be given there. So thank you for being a trailblazer in that regard, to dedicating your time to them.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that was working with that was certainly an honor. And really the work with first responders and the military is the highlight of my professional career. Even though I've done some great things that I really enjoy and love with sports, those are the memories that I hold most dear. The work that I did there.
Well, and I'll follow that up by saying this, that, a lot of people idolize pro athletes. I idolize the military. I idolize the people that serve this country. JB, you're included in that. That's one of the reasons that when we created this show, we made sure we had a veteran on it. And then, JB, if I'm not mistaken, I think like half of our guests are former military, and that's done by design. We've done that on purpose to make sure that we share those messages. Go ahead, JB.
No, I think it's that's exactly right. I just, when I saw Dr. Anderson, I actually saw you, doctor, working firsthand for a pro sports team. Lee, I'll tell you this funny story. Do you know how, like, sometimes, they take a model and they paint the model to look like the surroundings, and then the model pumps out, that's big here in Vegas. That's how Dr. Anderson was in the locker room. Like, you didn't know he was there, and all of a sudden, like, he was there, right. And he would help a player, and I was like, wow. So there was a couple of things that Dr. Anderson taught me. Obviously, I'm a cheerleader. I'm very loud. I'm very outgoing. And
nobody thinks that about you, JB.
Nobody. No one thinks that about me. But Dr. Anderson had this thing that I really loved. It's listen in silent, or an anagram. We talked about that, and that's why, because his listening skills were so good. And that's what that taught me, that patience, listen. Dr. Anderson, I wanted to, I remember when a coach came by and said something, hey, doc, are you going to make these guys 10% better, 20% better? And I remember you like chuckled a little bit, and you're like, no, 1% better. And that's going to equal wins. And I think sometimes when we talk about all the additional things, the qualitative things that we expect people to do in life to get better, can you just expand on that 1% better and how that makes a difference?
So it works on a lot of different levels. One of the levels is that the most obvious is that when we're talking about professional athletes, they're already elite. And the difference between the guy who's at the end of the bench and the guy that's getting the most ice time is usually not, this guy is 100% better than the guy that's on the other side of the bench. It's usually he's, small percentage better in certain areas, or it may even be that he believes that he's a small percent better than certain areas that differentiates. Of course, there's the outliers of the super talented guys who are just, mind-numbingly talented and able to be better no matter what. But most of professional sports, the degrees of difference are so minute, and they change, they fluctuate, that and athletes and coaches don't often remember that. Athletes especially think that they have to be the highlight reel of some other player's career in order to be as good as that player or good enough to play. And they don't understand that they just have to, the difference between them and the next guy is maybe 1%, 2%, 3%. The other thing to think about is if you talk to somebody about weight loss and they have to lose 100 pounds, and you keep telling them that they have to lose 100 pounds, it stifles them in the enormity of the task that's in front of them. But if you tell them, listen, just lose a pound this week, that's something that they can manage and get through and accomplish. And forward progression breeds success. Stagnation is the thing that kills success, that kills careers. But if you have some forward movement, even if it's just a small percentage, then you breed in yourself a sense of confidence, accomplishment, and self-efficacy that allows you to continue to be successful. So I think that, and the last part about that is, let's lower the temperature in the room when a coach is talking to a player, or when I'm talking to a player. I mean, even for me, because if a coach comes to me and says, hey, can you get this guy to perform 20% better? And now I feel like I have to throw everything in the book at this guy or girl and That's not necessary. I'm overloading the player. I'm giving him too much. I'm force feeding information, not for his benefit, but for my benefit, not for his skill, but for my ego. And so the 1% helps to keep everybody in check, because that may be all this player needs. And if he needs more, that'll come later. That next percent will come later. So I think the 1% is the way that I keep myself in check and keep the temperature lowered in the room.
Doctor, to support exactly what you just said, it's funny. I have a pretty funny story about this. I can't name the athlete because of the way I'm going to tell this story, but I'll just say he was a captain in the NHL. And I remember him telling me we were having this really in-depth discussion about training and development. And he echoed exactly what you just said of like, it's not about me getting 50% better. He goes, he said it just like this. Do you know the pay difference if I get 1% better in the NHL at my position? And he was making a point that at that level, as you said, everyone is so close that 1% is massive. It's a massive difference. Massive. And he was saying that I'm just focused on getting 1% better. Not because it was just about his paycheck, but he goes, that's a huge jump in the NHL. And I think the other thing that you said that's important is that, compartmentalizing efforts to change, right? Everyone's heard that phrase, the first step's the hardest, right? But we often, and too often, don't go beyond that statement, right? It's how are you going to approach this problem one step at a time? It's not if it even is a problem, right? The situation, so you can incrementally get better. You look at, you said one of those incredibly talented people, Sidney Crosby, right? Even he has spent off seasons on one skill, getting better at just one skill at a time. And when you look at that over the course of a career, which is probably what he did, he's gotten 15 different skills that he didn't have when he started, when he was already good, right? Or great, depending on how we want to talk about it. So it's amazing the psychology behind this and the top performers, and that is going to lead me into my next question. When you look at sports psychology today versus even just 10 years ago, there is a massive shift happening right now regarding the mental stigma. The stigma behind mental health, mental fitness, and that it's really out there now that this is something we should be focusing more on in the approach, and that what we see in the movies, and don't get me wrong, I love a good sports movie, but the coach screaming or that big locker room speech, that is such a small part of the bigger plan, right? So what are the things that you're seeing change in the game with these movements to understand mental health that maybe wasn't there in the past?
Well, I think that, like you said, there's a global recognition of how important the mental health of any individual is, but especially someone who's being put into a pressure-packed situation where your job is evaluated by hundreds of thousands of people a day, and you're exposed to all kinds of aberrant situations, and you're also a person who experiences life outside of sports, which creates its own set of mental health challenges, obstacles that we have to all overcome just as human beings. And so I think there's a global recognition of it. Where I think we're still lagging is both and organizationally and players is how do we access that? How do we make this relatable? How do we get to this and use it? And so I think there's a lot of confusion as to the difference between, performance and health. I think the stigma about, if I have a mental health issue, does that mean I'm crazy? Does that mean I'm broken? Does that mean that I'm irreparable? Because people tend to see mental health issues as permanent and irreparably damaging. So I think we still have to get past that. I still feel when I'm in a locker room, there are players who are hesitant to discuss it, not just with me, but with anybody. There are coaches who are wary of somebody who may seem like they're anxious or distressed, and it also elicits anger because the general public says, if you're making X millions of dollars a year, my problems all stem from the fact that I can't pay my bills. I can't send my kids to a private school. I can't, get better food on the table. I I can't get a new car because it's broken down. So a lot of my basic level problems I can attach to my monetary, my lack of monetary stability or economic stability. So when I see someone who's wealthy, who's also saying, I have that problem, as a person who's like, if I had your money, I'd have no problems. That comes to mind almost everybody you talk to. And really the economics obfuscates the true nature of being a human being, which is we all suffer the same wounds, right? They just look different. We all bleed the same places in the same places. And so I think that's the other problem, the public perception of what should you do if you're a professional athlete and you're having a mental health issue. Well, play through it, stop whining, don't cry, nobody cares. And to a certain extent, they're right. It's like your job is to go out there and perform and almost to entertain. And so we don't want you to break that fourth wall to a certain extent, but still they're human beings. And so we still have a disconnect between we have an understanding of mental health issues, but we have a disconnect between what those are and how they really apply to the professional and to the everyday person, actually.
Right.
No,
Go ahead, JB.
No, I was going to say, Doctor, for my aspect of, being in the military career and being in special operations, like we never talked about it because, we didn't want to lose our place in the line because,
right.
If the commander or the sergeant major thought you were a little off, then next thing you know, you got detailed to something else, maybe an instructor job, or, you got pulled out of the, out of the fight, out of the starting lineup, and no one wanted to deal with it. And I think obviously, the veteran suicide now rate is astronomical and that sort of thing. And I think it's important, that at least we're exposing people to this, and maybe it'll be another decade before we have coaches that completely understand it, and right. Athletes, parents, that sort of thing. Doctor, we used to always talk about how mental toughness was learned. It's, of course, your primary caregiver can imprint on some of that on you when you're a child, but it's a learned trait. You learn it as you go. You can lose it. It's kind of an up and down cycle. Ride the wave. Maybe you can expand on things we can do to learn this toughness, to become a better version of ourselves.
So I like to look at mental toughness as resiliency and resourcefulness, as a combination of those two things. Resiliency is, how do I recover when I get, punched emotionally or psychologically? And resourcefulness is, how do I muster all of the energy that I have internally and access the resources I have externally to be able to overcome obstacles that are in front of me. And then the resiliency and the resourcefulness play together to create a toughness. So if you think about a guy being physically tough, it's not just the guy who can throw the punch, it's the guy that can take the punch, right? So toughness is, how well do you absorb the blow? And then at that point, how do you assess the situation and respond so that, maybe you're more in command of the situation? So toughness isn't just who's the guy that powers through or the woman that powers through everything. It's a realistic approach of, how do I absorb the blow? How do I put that in perspective? How do I regroup, use resources at hand to now continue to progress towards my goal, right? And so the tough people do that. The tough people, you'll see a single mom, and you'll go, man, she's mentally tough. It's not because she can just take everything that you can't. It's because she absorbs that blow, she processes it, and she uses resources and resiliency to continue moving, to go forward, like, to work 2 or 3 jobs, or to go get educated, or whatever, or the single father, whatever. The same with the player. So, and the same with somebody in the military, because sometimes we think of toughness as lack of fear. And I'm nervous when I'm around a special forces person or first responder that has no fear. Those guys scare me, right? Because they may do something reckless. The guys that have fear but know how to face it, I call it courageously. Like I wear this band that says courage because I always teach my players, you don't have to be fearless. You just have to act in the face of fear. You trust your training, you trust your teammates, you trust your goal, your mission, and you act in the face of fear. And that creates a level of toughness and resiliency that I've seen special operators use, and law enforcement and athletes. It's a complex thing, mental toughness. So how do you teach it? You practice it. The same way that how do you acquire it? You practice it. The same way you acquire any other tool. You look at situations and you say, how do I rebound from this? How do I not let this stop me from my goals? What do I need to attain skill-wise or resource-wise to continue moving forward? And then that continues to breed a belief in self, and that's an important part of that too. So like I have a friend who doesn't like dating because he's had bad experiences with dating. He's like, it's obvious that I don't know how to pick the right woman. All of this stuff hurts me. I get depressed. I get, this ruins me, and you could look at him and go, stop being so weak, be tougher about this. But I told him, I said, your problem isn't that you choose bad relationships. Your problem is that you don't recognize that you're in a situation that you need to regroup, respond, and then and be resilient. And so you let those bad situations wreck you. That's where his mental toughness isn't there, not because he gets himself in bad situations, not because it hurts him, but because he doesn't respond to it in a healthy way. So that's what I tell players. You can always learn to be better at responding to things in a healthier, stronger way and being resolute in what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. I want to pull the thread on something you said earlier too. So a lot of the work that I do outside of this is in team dynamics and creating team bonds, right? And I'm under the belief, I'd love your thoughts on this, as someone in the field, obviously a professional, is I believe that to win, right, however you want to define that word, three things have to be there. You have to have the talent that's comparable within the league you're playing in. You have to have the tactics. Great talent can't overcome bad tactics. But the third, and I think most important part of that, is a team bond, is the ability for everyone. It doesn't always have to happen from the coach. Someone has to build this impenetrable bond. And you said this about having a vision and a mission and knowing the direction you need to be going in. From where you sit, is the creation of that team bond essential to not just winning, but to creating the best possible environment for mentally strong athletes and people? Because this can apply to anything, any team environment. It doesn't have to just be in sports.
Absolutely. We don't exist in a vacuum. Human beings don't exist in a vacuum. We're social animals, and we rely on the support of others in order to be our best selves. JB, when I worked with him, was excellent at that, understanding the group dynamic and really expressing in a very clear way how important being there for the other guy is, how important the person on your right and the person on your left is, and what you're doing is as much for them as it is for yourself, and your responsibility to them. And that bond it creates a situation where you're performing in a selfless way. And in a selfless way means you may give up something in order for the collective to succeed, or you may give more in order for the collective to succeed. And it's always measuring how much of self is required in order for others to be successful, and knowing that a rising tide floats all boats. And so teaching that is difficult because you train your whole life when you're a professional athlete to do well individually, no matter even if you're in a group thing. Like, I'm developing my skills, I'm developing my strength, I'm working hard to get chosen, at whatever level in a draft. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It always starts with an I. And then in these situations, in order to be successful, that I has to turn into something much broader and much much bigger than self. And so how do you teach a team to be a team when every person is there for the person to their right and the left, then as well as themselves, then you have a team. When everybody is there for themselves, then you have a collection of individuals, and you never know which direction that's going to go. At any moment, it's unpredictable.
That's a phenomenal way of looking at it. I mean, in a way, you've just defined the word team. And I think that a lot of coaches and athletes miss that, right? Because it is so individualistic at times. And really what you're talking about too is, if I'm not mistaken, is the lack or the absence of ego when it comes to making decisions. You know, I've been studying ego recently, and I'm fascinated because when we look at the word ego, we often kind of just mentally put it together with this, like, you know, gigantic person. I'm the best at what I do, and it's actually not that simple, is it? You know, ego can manifest
No.
itself in other ways too, by giving too much, you know, and identifying with yourself through something that really is not something you should be identifying to. So again, I'm kind of throwing this question to you randomly, but can we discuss ego for a second? You know, maybe how you define the word, and how teams and athletes need to approach experiencing that or harnessing that for the betterment of themselves and the team.
So clinically, I'm from a psychoanalytic bent. And so I see ego almost the way that Freud would define ego, right? But when you think about ego as far as, let's just call it self. I mean, it's a simple thing. It's the dynamic of self. It's who you see yourself as,
Yeah.
and who you wish to be. So ego is in and of itself is not a negative thing. Ego is just ego. It's how you protect it, how you project it, how you develop it, what you think is important in it. That's what creates the negative or positive version of your ego. And so we're always battling between, you know, our super ego and our id and all of these other things, our idealized self, our shadow selves. You know, and sports is no different. And sports is really hard to maintain a healthy ego. And the reason is because you're surrounded by the temptations in the desert. You know what I mean? You're surrounded by power and wealth and status and celebrity and excess. And so, and you know that if I do this, then I can have that. And if I become this, then this becomes mine. And so it's, how do you become selfless? How do you become almost defenseless in this situation where you don't defend your ego, you don't defend yourself, you just are. So ego is, I know I'm getting a little too heady in this, but ego is not in and of itself a bad thing. So the person who monitors who they are, and I tell players this all the time as an exercise, write down, using a list of descriptors, who is the person that you want to be? Most people don't know who they are and who they want to be. And they know what they want, but they don't know who they are within that want. So sometimes if what you want and who you want to be are not connected, then that creates an emotional dissonance. So I talked to a young man recently who, he wants to be a good father. He wants to be a good husband. He wants to be a good teammate. But what does he want? Oh, he wants more money. He wants he wants to be an all-star. He wants the excesses that come with that. You know, he doesn't want to be tempted, but he wants the temptations to be there. So who he is and who he wants to be and what he wants in his life aren't necessarily congruent. So he has to make a decision. We all do. We all have to create this, you know, we all have to make this structure within ourselves to say, this is who I want to be. And sometimes the most powerful word in my lexicon is no. And that creates a healthy ego, because your sense of self, your idealized self, and who you really are all congruent. The unhealthy ego is when those things are just, you know, they go in separate directions. The unhealthy ego chases what he wants. The unhealthy ego doesn't have a sense of who he is or wants to be. And the unhealthy ego is easily tempted. So
That is a amazing way of looking at it. And please don't ever think that you're babbling on. This stuff is incredibly insightful. It's exactly the stuff that we want to draw out. And you know, just staying on that for just one quick second, you know, that's hard enough for an adult to do, right? You look at a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, and they're told you need to know what you want to do. You need to know who you're going to be. And the truth is, it's very hard for teenagers to do that, right? But laying the foundation, and again, please feel free to comment on this. I think just laying the foundation of what you just said, of exploring this, that, hey, you don't have to know today who you're going to be when you're 25 or 35, but start asking the questions. I think so often we just don't know the right questions to ask, and we do too much telling of this is the path you have to go on. The greatest example of that is you have to go to college. You have to go to college, right? And listen, I have no problem with college. I have no problem with higher education. I think for student athletes that know really what they want to study, it really is a great option. But if you're 18 and you don't know what you want to be, there's nothing wrong with trade skills. There's nothing wrong with getting a job. So I think when it comes to that is just what are the questions, and you said them, that you need to know, right? So that you can start to go down the path. So would you agree with that, that maybe we're not giving the youth enough of those questions, those guiding philosophies to make better decisions?
well, I think we get confused with what we want to be and who we want to be.
Right.
And so I think you can ask a kid a child that's as young as 6, who do you want to be? And explain to him, you know, if he says, well, I want to be an astronaut, then let's go. That's what you want to do. Who do you want to be?
Right.
I want to be somebody who shares. It can be as simple as that. My grandson, you know, sharing is caring. So when he doesn't share, I pull him aside and I go, Alexander, is this the kind of person you want to be? The person that doesn't share? And he goes, no. I said, then you have to share. It's a simple lesson for him.
Right.
If you don't want to be that kind of person, then here are the actions you have to take to be something different. And so I think when our world gets bigger than those simple questions, I know I'm oversimplifying the concept, but I know when an adolescent says, I want to be popular, that's what you want to be. But who do you want to be?
Right.
And
Right.
they miss that. Like, I want to be good looking. Okay, that's what you want to be, but who do you want to be? I want to be wealthy. I want to have this car. I want to have a Model Y. Those are all those are all external about what, but it's still not saying who.
Right.
Who do you want to be? Because I could be this particular person that has these things, but if I have them and I have a good sense of self, if I'm intact as a human being, then I have those things, not because I pursue those things, but those things came to me organically.
Right.
And they have much more value in that way. And if they never come, their worth doesn't define you.
Right. And that's such an important lesson, right? For those of you listening right now. And Dr. Anderson, you know, you affirm me, sir, and I'll tell you why. You know, when I work with teams, and I always find this a funny conversation. This usually happens the first day when I'm working with a team. I say, okay, you know, what kind of team are we going to be? Who are we and why? You know, what do we want? And 9 times out of 10, we want to win. We want to win. Like, that's great. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants to win. I've never interviewed a team that says, well, we want to lose or we want to come in 5th place.
Right.
I said, who are we? What is it about us that's going to help us get to that goal? What do you want other teams to say about us when they leave the building? What's our identity? And I think so many teams don't do that, right? Of course you want to win. I always kind of laugh when they say it, not at them, but yeah, I get it. But you're right. When you bring that down to the individual level, it's just as important, especially when you're dealing with athletes. So I do want to transition a little bit here because we want to talk about the type of work you do, you know, and when you work with an athlete or begin working with an athlete, is there a specific process? Is it dependent on their needs? You know, do you interview them? Could you walk us through that process a little bit, if you're comfortable with it?
Sure. I mean, it depends on why the athlete's coming to me. So the process is first listening. I mean, start with listening, then assure the person that you're there for them, not for you, not for the organization. So I develop relationships before I have conversation, before I do therapy, treatment, whatever, unless it's an acute problem, unless there's somebody who's in distress in that moment, and needs an intervention. But if it's the typical thing, I develop a relationships first, which is tell me about yourself. Don't tell me about the problem right now. Tell me about yourself. Tell me what makes you happy, what creates excitement in you, what are you trying to become, who are you as a person, who are you as an athlete, things like that. What's your favorite movie, anything, because people like to talk to people who are invested in them. And the quickest way to show that you're invested in somebody is by talking to them about them and listening to them when they speak. So I know this sounds ridiculous, and intuitively you're just like, oh, who doesn't know that? The question is, how often do we practice that? How often do we just really talk to a person to learn about that person? And the answer, and including for me, is rarely. We talk to people because we typically talk to people because we want them to get something that we have to offer, intellectually, emotionally, physically, whatever. It's like, hey, look, JB, I got some stuff that I want to teach you about this. I want to tell you about that. It's rare that I go, JB, tell me about you so that I can understand you and maybe learn a little bit more for myself. And so once a player gets that, that's part of the micro process that I start with. And then, of course, we delve into the issues. And my process is to, we don't, listen, we've laid out a buffet of issues here. We don't have to eat everything. Let's just start with the simplest thing right now. The tendency for people in the helping professions is to help. And sometimes we see the whole problem and we want to help everything. And we get impatient for the person to be better because it does something for us as well as it does something for them. Like, I know the answer, let me tell you. I can see down this river. So the analogy that one of my professors had, it goes, as a therapist, you're standing on the cliff and you're looking down at a river and you see your patient in a boat and he's going upstream and you see the forks in the river, and one leads to gentler waters and one leads to a waterfall. And your tendency is to scream down at them, go right, paddle right, rather than to let them experience that journey, recognize the signs of rough water and calm water, help them to navigate, get in the boat with them, paddle in the direction that they need to go, and then get them in the right direction. Our tendency is, we know the answer, let's tell them before they get to the bad part. Never works. Never works. Doesn't work with kids, doesn't work with significant others, doesn't work with athletes, doesn't work with anybody. Let me tell you what you need to do in order to be healthier, happier, and do better. Never works. Because people are like, oh, thanks, Derick, I will never do that, and I'll talk to you later. Okay. And then I have the honor of being able to say, I told you so when you mess up. Or, oh, that was a good thing that you didn't listen to me, and I can joke about it and slough it off. But really, the micro process of listening, getting to know, understanding the human being, and then working on small bits of issues, the 1% idea. Let's just reduce your anxiety by a little bit by doing this. Let's just clear up your thinking about what it means to get out of a slump. Why would you try to hit a home run to get out of a slump? Like, if you could do that on command, you'd never be in a slump. So right. Why don't we think about this in a different way? Why would you want to get a goal, make getting goals the way you get out of a slump? Why don't we just talk about what you can do in your shift that makes you competent and makes you feel confident in the way that you're playing? And then the goals come. Right. So I try to bring it down to a level that is attainable and digestible for both of us. Because the worst thing you want to do as a psychologist is to set yourself up to be a wizard or a genie that can magically make things happen, because they inevitably don't. and then you look like an ass, and then you're apologizing like, oh, that worked the last guy I had, like you don't want to be that. I always tell my players, don't start getting magical around me. I am no way, shape, or form a genie. I can't make magical things happen. You're going to fall on your face more, even after talking to me. So these are the processes that I go through. These are the relationships I try to develop, the way that I look at it.
Doctor, that's amazing. And I remember, I got to spend, a few years with you, and every single day I learned something. And we all used to talk about that emotional quotient, like understanding who human beings are, like where they come from. And, the NHL is such a melting pot of individuals, from, having the kid from Minnesota to, Jaromir Jagr to,
Right.
Alexander Barkov, one of the players that, we talk about, who just, has talent, from every aspect, and plus, a wonderful human being. And I think it's important that, we, and used to always try to do that. And I saw you with the coaches and everything else. We used to try to teach that, emotional quotient to the staff, to the coaches. I remember even, sometimes the executives, they sit up in the box at the bird's eye level, and they're watching the game from there. Kind of the analogy you just said about the boat going to the fork. They can see things, but down at the players level, they're skating around with 6'3", men around them trying to make a play. So you see things differently, and sometimes judgments are made. Like they're making judgments. Right. Well, he should have made that play. And they don't see it from that level. Maybe you could just talk about, especially there's a lot of young coaches that are on this, listen to this podcast, and they want to become a better leader. They want to understand people more. And it's not always about the X's and the O's. It's about that emotional quotient and how we build that, because that's a learned trait too, and how we build that to make ourselves successful.
Right. So I'm sorry, what's the question?
But like how like a young coach can expand their understanding of other human beings, their emotional quotient.
Stop studying sports all the time. I mean, go study other things in life. Go read one of JB's books and learn about leadership and what he did. Go understand what the process of a great artist or musician. Go understand anything, but expand your knowledge of yourself in the world, and then it broadens your ability to communicate, and it also makes your scope much less narrow when you talk to a player about winning, losing, getting better, whatever. The bigger the person, the more that they have as far as knowledge, experience, understanding, the easier it is for them to find different pathways to success. And so if you're a coach, don't just sit there studying plays and the history of sports all the time. Become a three-dimensional human being so that you can talk to people in a three-dimensional way and relate to people in a three-dimensional way. Because if sports is what you're doing, sports is who you are, sports is what you read, sports is what you think about, if that's what you do all the time, and I understand there's some coaches who think that you have to be enveloped in what you're doing, but if that's what you are all the time, imagine the internal pressure when that's not going well. Imagine that you have no place else to go to recover and become whole again, as far as even recovering from gain to gain, because you put everything in this one basket. And when it falls, which it inevitably does, and those eggs crack, then how do you recover and become something and go back to this in a fresh perspective with a different approach in a resilient way? You can't. So my advice to coaches is to learn more about more things, and don't be so tunnel vision as far as the approach that you have to the world and to your athletes.
Wow, that's excellent. And a friend of mine was an NHL coach, and he got fired, and he called me and he said, what do I do? I was like, go do something else. And he joined a CrossFit gym. He had to lose some weight. He joined a CrossFit gym, and he went to this gym, and no one knew he was a hockey coach. No one cared. And he said after this, 8 month of experience, he got hired again. But 8 months, he didn't work, and he did that. He was like, I met other human beings.
Right.
I've learned so many different things.
Right.
And again, he went to a place that no one cared you were a hockey coach.
Right. Yeah.
You're another human. So,
Dr. Anderson, I'll tell you too. And again, I'm going to break the Cardinal Son of podcast and use myself as an example, but it's so true what you're saying. And like, look, I wanted to be a team builder, right? And I had been in ice hockey my whole life. And, someone helped me come to this conclusion of asking these questions. Well, where's the best team on the planet? Who's the best team on the planet? And I said, it's probably the U.S. military. So I started studying the U.S. military on how to build teams, right? And then I remember, I've got players with anxiety. What should I do? I started learning about meditation. I started learning about yoga and other aspects outside of hockey, relationships, right? When I got into business, I said, who's the best business person on the planet? And I look for these people and take the courses that they provide. It doesn't always have to be the best. I mean, that's subjective, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
My point is I looked outside of hockey. I looked outside of the game to build skills. And as you said, not only did I become a better hockey coach, just a better person in general. And I got new skill sets in other places that now I'm able to help other people where I wasn't before. And I think so much of what you're saying, again, we're focused on athletes and coaches here, but it applies to coaches about what you're saying of don't just keep it to one thing. I've always said this too. You could be the best statistician on the planet. You could be the best tactician on the planet, the best. No one's better than you. But if you can't effectively communicate those tactics to your players, what is your worth? Right?
Right.
What is your worth? So you're the best at X's and O's, but you can't communicate. And then vice versa. If you're the best communicator on the planet, but you don't know the tactics. So it's all about kind of expanding that mental library. And like you said, seeing the world, because look, especially in sport, anybody listening, you will get tunnel vision. I talked about that earlier, right? You will just naturally get stuck in something. You have to be able to break out of that. And I've always heard, I don't have time. Well, we have an off season for a reason, right? You're not playing all the time. Go ahead.
Even during season, I tell players, you have plenty of opportunity to practice other skills. You have no idea how much time is killed in professional sports. Like, guys, what do I need to do to kill some time here? I got to kill some time there.
Right.
Like there's a lot of dead space in between super active space. And so it doesn't take long to practice focus. I say you practice focus every day you drive your car. It doesn't take time or a lot of effort to practice listening. You have a significant other, you have kids, you have parents. Stop and say, how do I listen better? All of these things are skills that you use offhand, but you're not mindful of the fact that you're using them. So take some time and be mindful of the fact that you can practice focus, you can practice going in and out of focus, you can practice communicating, you can practice listening. You can practice appreciating something from a different perspective just in your everyday life as you're driving to the rink or the field or the court or whatever it may be. So, the cop out of time is one that I have very little patience or interest in, because you have nothing but time in sport, right?
Yeah. And Dr. Anderson, a lot of times, organizations still feel if the players doing something else, they're not focused on the sport. They're not bringing it all. And I think sometimes then players, they hide these personal activities. They don't want to talk about it because, sometimes the organization is like, well, they should just be focused on the sport, which is, we know is completely,
not going to happen.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. I have a friend who's a former NFL player. Now he's a film producer, and he said when he was in the NFL, he didn't say, like, he would be writing these scripts for a film or a short story, and he said somebody found out. Next thing you know, they're like, oh, what, you're not focused on you should be reading the playbook. And he's like, I know the playbook. don't need to do
Right.
it. So I think that's the other stigma, that the leaders of the organization need to be very proactive in allowing, the employee, the athlete, to continue to be creative.
Well,
Doctor,
leaders
go
in
ahead.
organizations confuse leadership with control,
Mhm.
and control and leadership aren't the same thing. If I can control what's going on, if I can control what this asset is doing, whether this asset is an athlete, a trainer, a psychologist, somebody who specializes in leadership and group dynamics like you, if I can control my assets, then I'm leading them, and then I can guarantee results because I'm controlling those assets. So I want to account for their dead time. I want to account for their active time. I want to account for the way that they're applying themselves to their trade. I want to account for everything. I'm not saying that you should be unaware of things, but control doesn't equal success. Control doesn't equal good leadership. So when we allow people to express themselves in healthy ways, then we get much less of the aberrant, unhealthy behavior that pops up, that rears its ugly head, because we've given them healthy outlets and healthy ways of expressing and exploring themselves. Now, if you take away healthy things, people will inevitably find something unhealthy or some other way to express themselves, and so it's not the best thing. I see it too often in sports and other places where that all comes from insecurity and ignorance sometimes. So.
No, exactly. And I know you've seen it firsthand. Doctor, I just want to, without naming names, can you give us an example when an athlete maybe faced his or her fears and overcame those challenges and achieved success? I'm sure you have, plenty of examples, but can you give us one?
I'll give you an example that's off the beaten path. So I got a text message from a minor league player who was toiling in the minor leagues. He kind of bottomed out or topped out at AA, and his challenge was, how do I know when to let this go, and what becomes of me if I do? Because I've been doing this since I'm 6'5", and I'm here, and I'm 2 steps away from the majors in my dream. And my fear is, what becomes of me if I let this go? And so I was doing a talk to a group of players, probably in his locker room. And this wasn't a player who was on my radar a lot. I see hundreds of players all the time. I knew him, nice young man, quiet, didn't ask me any questions, didn't approach me in the locker room, didn't ask me anything. And maybe 2.5 years after I was done with that team, I get a text message, and it was a long text message from him, to the point where I had to look him up to be sure I knew who I was, reading a text message from. And he said, thank you. You gave a talk about courageousness. You gave a talk about decisions, how important it is to make a decision, and that the courageous person makes a decision without fear of it being the wrong decision. They get all the information, they make a decision based on what's healthy and what propels them forward towards their stated goals. And if your goal isn't to be in a place or do a thing, but to be a type of person, then it's easier to make those kind of decisions. And he says, and that resonated with me. And I made the decision to leave baseball. It wasn't something that I recommended to anybody. I never tell a player to leave or stay. I don't want responsibility for a person's life in that way. He said, but I found myself, I found my significant other, I found a different career. I found a relationship that I lost with my father. I found so much when I let go of the fear of all my worth is tied up into what I do as an athlete, as opposed to who I could be as a human being. And so this strained relationship I had with my father, because he wanted me to be a baseball player, and I resented that I thought he only loved me because I could play baseball. I was able to relate to people in a healthier way because I wasn't living with the stress and the anxiety and the thought that I was a disappointment to everyone, and that my only value was that I was an athlete. So all of that stuff I let go of, and I faced those fears that I lived with, and it helped me to find who I was, and I'm a happier person than I was. And I caution people against chasing happiness, but I'm a healthier person than I was when I was a baseball player. And I realized that there's more to me than just my ability to swing a bat and catch a ball.
You know, Dr. Anderson, you're bringing up a great point here too. And there's this quote I'm sure you've heard that athletes die twice: the day they stop playing the game and the day they actually die. And look, there is some minor truth that it's very painful when you have to stop playing a sport. I've been through it. We all have to go through it at some point if you're an athlete. But I think it's the wrong way of looking at it. I think the statement should be you're actually born twice, right? The day you're born, right, and then the day your athletic career ends. When I finished playing sports competitively, I mean, I still play, but when my chances of going to the show ended, let me put it that way, I was devastated. I really was. But I didn't realize yet the gift that would come from being able to open my mind to being a father, being a husband, exploring other academic options, to be able to be involved in teams in a different way. I think the person that actually championed this the most is Kobe Bryant. And unfortunately, he was taken too soon. But he set an incredible example. When he retired from the NBA, man, he pursued everything but basketball after that. And it was a really amazing thing to watch, which is, I'm going to be a film producer, and I'm going to be this, and I'm going to be that. And he really started to do it. And then again, he was taken away. But the point is that he didn't let basketball define who he was going to be for the rest of his life. And when you think about some of the greatest athletes of all time, which he would fall into that bucket, we don't remember their lives past the sport, right? He was going to be in a position where he was going to be remembered for the other things that he wanted to do. And look, you can take a step back and say, well, that's Kobe Bryant. He has millions of dollars. That's not the point. The point was he was pursuing other interests, and he understood that his career was going to end at some point and that he had to move forward. So if you're an athlete out there, or even a coach, you have to understand that there is life beyond the sport, even if you grew up not understanding that. I think it's such an important thing to know or to hear other people say. And you are absolutely right about the courageousness of that player to understand that, to know that. This goes back to what you were saying. I wrote it down about who you want to be and what you want to do, right? It sounds like he found out who he wanted to be, or maybe he finally defined that he wasn't living by someone else's standards, his father, which, by the way, is also a story too much in sports of parents vicariously living through their children. When it comes to my son, look, hockey was my thing, and he does play. He saw me play, but I've never wanted him to feel like he has to play to appease me. I want him to play because he loves to play. And if he decides he doesn't want to do that, or my daughter, they don't have to do that. It's not going to be something I'm going to put pressure on. I think that's a whole nother episode in it of itself, but it's an important aspect to bring up. I'll bring it to another question, is that I think the stigma surrounding this is something that has to be broken, right? So the question I have for you, and I'm putting this one out there a little bit, is we talked about, JB brought this up, the owners and the coaches, that you have to be thinking about the sport all the time, right? You can't win without that. It's kind of an old school way of thinking in my mind. So here's the question. Have you ever worked with a team that was mentally sound, or working towards being mentally sound or strong, that had good mental strength, that didn't succeed? And I don't mean winning the Stanley Cup or the Lombardi Trophy. Have you ever worked with a team that was mentally strong that wasn't on a path towards success?
Well, let me preface it by saying that I've worked with teams and had the good fortune of being with teams that honestly internally were a wreck, and then some internally you saw that they were on the path, as you say, towards something positive. I have seen horrible teams that are horrible internally be successful, win, but eventually fall apart. I've seen the collateral damage of an unhealthy team that is successful. I've seen the collateral damage of that, and it's pretty extensive, both organizationally, personnel-wise, player-wise. There's ramifications to winning at all costs, and especially if the cost is the health of the individuals inside of the organization. I've seen organizations take good care of the people there that haven't won the ultimate prize, but there's a sense of enthusiasm and optimism about the direction that they're going that creates the all-in mentality that so many people are trying to force on other people, that comes organically because that's a place that people are gravitating to because it gives them some kind of respect and efficacy. It honors them in the contributions that they're making to the collective. And so you don't have to ask for everybody to be all in, because people are enthusiastically all in, because that's a place that fortifies them. So I know that those places are going to be successful, and I've seen that, occur. I've also seen places that that are struggling to try to find it. They have the best intentions. They bring in people, they take out people. They're not clear on how to create health, and they struggle with it. But their intention is to ultimately be a healthy, whole organization that moves towards something positive. So I think JB has seen that too, and so they struggle with it. Just like you see a relationship where you go, boy, those are two good people. They just can't seem to make it work. There's something missing. Maybe they're lacking a skill. Maybe they're lacking an ability. Maybe they're lacking awareness. And there's just one thing that makes it click. Maybe a difference in the way they communicate. Maybe it's a good person who was taught to communicate poorly through anger or abrasiveness. And if you just change that dynamic, things get better. So I haven't seen just a clear-cut, dichotomy of unhealthy this and healthy that, but I have seen combinations of it. And you do know health when you're in the middle of it. Every human being knows goodness when they're in the middle of it, right? And so the first step to greatness is goodness. And so when you go into an organization and you see good stuff going on, they're inclined to go towards greatness. And then when you go into a place and they're like, oh, this is great, we've won the Super Bowl, and you're like, yeah, that's greatness, but there's no goodness here, so we know the direction you're going. And so that's a long-winded circular way of answering your question.
It's a great answer. It's a great answer. There has not been enough study into the best organizations. Again, look, there's a difference between a one-time champion and the New England Patriots for 20 years and the New York Yankees.
Right.
The common themes within these clubs and these organizations. And I think that it speaks to what you are speaking about. And I think that's something that needs to be heavily studied. Go ahead, JB.
No, I just think there's a couple things that, first off, I've taken 2 pages of notes, Dr. Anderson, because every time you talk, I feel I get smarter.
I get a better
there's a couple
than these stickies. That's
yes, you got to get a better notepad.
You're both very kind. I appreciate it.
But a couple of things I'll just tell you, Lee. So when I was with an NHL team and people weren't really sure what I was doing, and actually there was some like, oh, what's he supposed to do? And actually Dr. Anderson coined it to the senior staff. He's like, JB does the macro, I do the micro. And it was I was like, wow, that's actually really good. But doctor, I want to thank you for everything that you taught me about, just being a good human being in sports, with leadership and psychology and helping others. And, you've helped me just as much as you've helped other players and staff. And I appreciate that so much, because what I like is that, there you were doing work for the juvenile justice system, and somebody recognized something in you, and that kind of led you to sports, and you in turn recognized something in me, and that led me to other things. So I appreciate that. So I just want the listeners to know, if you recognize something in somebody, tell them,
right?
pull them in. So thank you for that, doctor. My last question. My last question, doctor, is there, I know you like athletes in all sports. Do you have a favorite sport?
Well, I mean, for me, the hockey team here is one that I cherish. My experiences there. One, because it's given me lifelong friends like you, JB, and I have those friends from other sports, but I have friends like you, JB. But it's also something that is close to me. I'm able to share it with my family because a big thing for me is to be able to share my life in all. I don't compartmentalize my life because why should I? I don't want to. And so they allow that to happen. I take my grandson to go and watch, he gets to go and watch players. And JB knows this. We've known a lot of those players since they were teenagers,
Yes.
literally teenagers.
Exactly.
And we watched them become men and good athletes, but good men first. And there's nothing more fulfilling than that. You couldn't trade the Stanley Cup for me, in my position. You couldn't trade that for that experience. I would rather take the experience of seeing good young men become good professionals and good, adults. So I've had that experience. Now I've had that in other things. When I was with the Mets, I still have players that I talk to and care about, and with every sport that I've worked in. I think the ability to share my life with the Panthers and the mutual respect that they've given me creates a little more of a bond there. But I've rarely had a bad situation in sports. I mean, this is what I say to everybody. Don't go into professional sports thinking that you're going to be there for 20 years. You're basically in the hobby of a billionaire. It's a billionaire's hobby, whatever team you go work for. And just like a Lego piece that could roll under a bed, you could be replaced. And so looking for security and, a lifelong job, some people have it, others don't. That's not the reason why you go into it. You go into it because you really want to bring something to the lives of the players and the coaches and the families that you work with. You go into it because you love the idea of competition and this aberrant environment that creates its own set of challenges for young people that you want to be able to advocate for and help. You go into it because you create relationships like the one I have with JB. And actually, that's the reason I went into every single job that I had. I would, when I worked running the mental health department of prisons, I'd go into it and I'd see some of the most horrendous things in the world, but my team was there. I helped some people, and I had some of the best days of my life, making a lot less money, seeing a lot worse things, not sitting in an air-conditioned box, eating catered food with a nice polo with the logo on it. I was sitting in a mosquito-infested office with no air conditioning, sweating, looking at prisoners, and I still had a great time because I approached each one of these things with the same attitude. What's the relationships that I can build? How can I measure success by creating something healthy for other people? And really, how can I fulfill myself inside the most unfulfilling looking environment? And that's by really attending to the needs of others and incorporating the things that give me joy inside of my work. So that's what I would do.
Love it.
Well, I got to tell you, Dr. Anderson, we're privileged to have the technology nowadays to spread information like this. And I know that you were very humble with your answers today, but I'll tell you, there is so much wisdom in this hour that we've spent together, and it will impact the lives of the listeners of this show. And I know that because it's impacted my life. Just listening to you speak.
I appreciate that.
I mean it. Same thing with JB. I mean, again, we were looking forward to this episode. We look forward to all of them, but this one specifically, because it falls into what we do. But I can't thank you enough for being here today and for sharing that. And we will spread the word. You have my word on that we will take this episode and harvest it and put it out as many places as we can to spread the knowledge you shared with us today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be a service to you and your listeners. Thank you, JB, for maintaining our connection. You're a great person, and anything I can do to help you, I always will. And thank you for always helping me.
Thank you, Doctor.
It was nice meeting you. It's great having a new acquaintance, a new friend, I'll call you, and good luck with your podcast. And hopefully I didn't bore your listeners or
you didn't.
Your watchers or whatever.
You didn't. You have my word. And, with that said, I'm going to close it out now because I have to. So it's like a slide. But thank you so much for being here. And that's going to do it for this episode of Win Championship Trades for Life, which is powered by Pivotal Moments. And once again, you can learn more about the organization and our channel Grit at pivotalmoments.org. Get more inspirational, entertaining, and educational content. For Dr. Derick Anderson, JB Spizo, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure to keep an eye out for more episodes soon, wherever podcasts can be heard. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.